Moving on to the debate number 2. The thing about war is that it can both divide and unite nations. This is precisely what we are seeing in the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict. While Israel continues to destroy Hamas's terrorist infrastructure with their fighter jets, the United States military has deployed an aircraft carrier and attack ships in the Persian Gulf. It has also set up advanced missile defense systems in the area. The United Kingdom has also sent Royal Navy ships and spy planes to support Israel, while Germany has permitted Israel to use Heron combat drones to target Hamas's hideouts. China, which has been rallying behind Iran, has stationed up to 6 warships in the Middle East over the past 2 weeks. More and more countries are getting involved in the conflict, from the ground to the United Nations. Listen in to the reactions coming in.
What's harsh is the way Hamas is using people as human shields. What's harsh is taking a couple of hundred hostages and leaving families anxious, waiting and worrying to figure out where their loved ones are. What's harsh is dropping in on a music festival and slaughtering a bunch of young people just trying to enjoy an afternoon. That there have been civilian casualties and that there likely will be more is being honest, because that's what war is.
United States and several European countries are watching and supporting the killing of about 7,000 civilians in less than 3 weeks by the Israeli regime in Gaza and West Bank of Palestine.
We need to ensure every step of the way that humanitarian access is granted into Gaza, that civilians, particularly nationals of other countries like Canada, can get out, that we're flowing in medical supplies and support for people in there. That is essential. That is why we're calling for humanitarian pauses.
Joining me tonight to shed light on what really is the situation in the Middle East, in the Israel-Hamas conflict, is Eylon Levy, spokesperson of the government of Israel. Good evening, Eylon Levy, and thank you very much for joining me on Times Now.
Good evening, Navika.
I just want to ask you, are we looking at a situation which is now escalating, given the fact that even though the United States says that its strikes on Syria are nothing to do with the Israel-Hamas conflict, the fact is more and more countries seem to be getting involved. Do you see an escalation in the area?
It's day 21 now after the October 7th massacre, when Hamas brutally killed 1,400 of our people and abducted nearly 230 people into the Gaza Strip. And Hamas is continuing to shoot rockets all across Israel. In just the last few hours, I had to run twice into a bomb shelter because Hamas is shooting rockets at Israel. We're talking 8,000 rockets on Israel in the last 21 days. One of those rockets hit a building in Tel Aviv, and there are injured people. Now, Hamas wants to escalate the conflict. Hamas is calling on Hezbollah, its twin sister in Lebanon, to enter the conflict and shoot more rockets at Israel. And we've been very clear. Our mission at the moment is to defeat Hamas. We're focusing on the Gaza Strip. We're focusing on the evil ISIS-like terror organization that burned, beheaded, butchered, tortured, mutilated people on the 7th of October. We don't want this conflict to expand. We're ready to fight on 2 fronts if we have to. We don't want to. Hezbollah drags us into a full-scale war in the north, then we're ready to fight on 2 fronts. We're ready to win, and the consequences will be severe. But at the moment, Israel is trying to conflict, to focus on Hamas in the Gaza Strip. But indeed, Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran, part of this regional axis of evil, are trying to escalate the conflict, escalate the situation. And that's why it's very important that the United States has signaled its support. The US has sent 2 aircraft carrier groups into the Middle East in a clear message. Don't mess with Israel. Anyone thinking of expanding this conflict, don't do it.
Well, let me also ask you, the United Nations also seems to be divided down the middle. On the one hand, at Times Square, we see 200 odd empty chairs being kept representing each of the hostages taken by Hamas. On the other side, the UNGA is holding its special emergency session. We're also seeing, that countries are also divided down the middle. How does Israel see the positioning of various countries on both sides?
This is outrageous that there's even a debate. On October 7th, Hamas committed a crime against humanity that murdered, injured, or abducted the nationals of over 40 states in the most brutal, spectacular violence that is imaginable. Our war against Hamas, the war that Hamas has declared on us, is a war between humanity and savagery, between civilization and barbarism. And we expect the whole world to state something that is very obvious. Israel has a right of self-defense. Israel has a duty of self-defense. Israel was the victim of an act of aggression by a barbaric terrorist group that massacred 1,400 of our friends and family, injured over 5,000 people, traumatized tens of thousands, abducted 230 people, including children, including 30 children. We were the victims of an act of aggression, and we expect the whole world to stand by our side and make it clear that Israel has every right to go after Hamas and destroy it. And we're going to destroy Hamas just as the international community destroyed ISIS. Hamas proved itself to be worse than ISIS with its violence on October 7th. We're building an international coalition in the free world of countries that understand we have to defeat Hamas. This evil jihadi violence cannot be allowed to continue, and we deplore any country that is not standing firmly by Israel's side and its right of self-defense. Really, it's a no-brainer.
I want to ask you, if you do undertake a land invasion into Gaza, what about the prospect of human casualties? How will Israel distinguish between who is a civilian, who is the Hamas, and what happens then to the narrative that is being set across the world, about civilian casualties in Hamas as well?
First of all, I'll say that the humanitarian suffering inside the Gaza Strip as a result of Hamas's decision to declare war against Israel is truly heartbreaking. We don't want civilians to be hurt at all. Our war is against Hamas, the evil terror organization that declared war on us. It's not against the Palestinians. It's not against the people of Gaza. And that's why Israel is doing everything it can to keep civilians out of harm's way. On our side, we've evacuated well over 100,000 people from the conflict areas. Inside the Gaza Strip, we're also asking civilians to move out of northern Gaza. And that's because Hamas is using them as human shields. Hamas has embedded its terror infrastructure, its rockets, its weapon silos, its command posts in tunnels underneath homes, underneath schools, underneath hospitals. And those are all legitimate military targets. We're going to destroy all of them. And in order to do that, we're asking civilians to get out of the way, and Hamas is stopping them. Hamas has set up roadblocks to stop civilians from leaving because Hamas doesn't care about Palestinian lives in the Gaza Strip. The only party here that is trying to protect lives inside the Gaza Strip is Israel. And I hope that after we win this war, and this war will end with an Israeli victory, this war will end with Hamas defeated. After this war, we're going to create the space for more moderate, peaceful voices to rebuild the Gaza Strip together with the international community without Hamas, without the evil terror group that perpetrated the October 7th massacre, because we can no longer live next to such an awful terror organization. We will defeat it, and we'll do everything that we can to protect civilian lives inside the Gaza Strip.
Well, let me ask you, how do you respond to Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, who said that Hamas's attack did not happen in a vacuum? Do you see this as a justification of the attack or a rationalization of the attack by the UN Secretary General?
There can be no excuses for making excuses for Hamas's atrocities on October 7th. But I'll tell you, Antonio Guterres was right. The October 7th massacre didn't happen in a vacuum. It came after years of Hamas saying openly that it has a genocidal campaign to murder all the Jews and destroy the state of Israel. It's been clear about that. Its leaders have said openly, called on their supporters to rip the Jews' hearts out of their bodies and murder them. It comes in the context of years of indoctrination of children, years in which Hamas has stolen humanitarian aid, used the fuel and the electricity and the water that Israel was supplying to the Gaza Strip to build a terror machine. Think of all the concrete that Israel sent into the Gaza Strip to build houses. Hamas used it to build tunnels. Think of all the fuel that Israel sent into the Gaza Strip. They're using it to shoot rockets at us. So the October 7th massacre didn't happen in a vacuum. And it's important to remember the enemy we're dealing with. We're dealing with an enemy that says openly in its charter, it wants to murder all the Jews. It wants to destroy the state of Israel and replace it with the religious Islamic caliphate. That's the enemy that we're fighting against. And that's the enemy we're going to defeat.
But many also raise the question, and that's reflected in a lot of what the Western media is saying, channels like the BBC, newspapers in the United States of America, who say that the reaction from Israel has not been proportionate because 7,000 Palestinians have been killed, 3,000 of them may be children. How do you respond to these attacks and the narrative that is being set worldwide?
First of all, as I said, the suffering inside Gaza is, of course, tragic, and we hold Hamas solely responsible for the war crime of shooting its rockets from inside civilian areas and placing those people in danger. But let me say this. Proportionality doesn't mean tit for tat. It doesn't mean that if Hamas invades and butchers, beheads, rapes 1,400 people, we need to do exactly the same thing. That's not proportionality. Proportionality means that we have to use the force that is necessary for our legitimate war aims. Israel was attacked. We were the victims of an act of aggression. Our right of self-defense is to go after the terror organization that did this, to dismantle it so it can never do that again. And we are using all the force that is necessary to dismantle Hamas so it can never again harm our civilians. Now, it's going to be a difficult job. It's going to be difficult because Hamas has entrenched itself inside civilian areas. That's why we're asking civilians to get out of the way. But Israel is going to use all necessary force to target the Hamas terror machine inside the Gaza Strip, and that is exactly what we're continuing to do.
Well, let me ask you, 4 hostages have been released, 2 elderly women, 2 Americans as well, while around 200 hostages still seem to be kept captive by Hamas. It seems like Hamas has been trying to project an image that they're considerate. How does Israel plan to combat this narrative, and what is your latest information on the hostages still held captive?
Hamas released 4 hostages under international pressure. We welcome their release and we call for more international pressure on Hamas, on its supporters, to make it clear there is no excuse for ripping babies out of their beds, murdering their parents and taking them hostage into the Gaza Strip. We're talking about around 230 hostages. 230 hostages, including 30 children. 30 children under the age of 16. Like this boy. This is Erez. Yesterday was his 12th birthday. He was abducted by Hamas. He's being held, probably abused, in a tunnel underneath the Gaza Strip. This is a war crime. His family is still grieving because they murdered his grandmother and his cousin. He's been abducted into the Gaza Strip, and there is no excuse for this whatsoever. And we're calling on the whole world to put more pressure on Hamas, more pressure on its supporters to release the civilian hostages, because this is a war crime. It's a crime against humanity. There can be no excuse. And I'm sure that viewers watching at home, if, God forbid, ISIS were to abduct 30 Indian children and take them hostages, the Indian government would do everything it can and go to the ends of the earth to bring those children and bring those hostages home. And that is one of the objectives of our war. It's to bring the hostages home and to make sure that Hamas can never, ever, ever again invade our homes and rip our children out of their beds.
Eylon Levy, I know we live in difficult times. Heart goes out to all those who've lost their lives, lost their loved ones. And we do hope...
And we really do appreciate that support that we're feeling, especially from the people of India. We know that they understand what we're dealing with, such an evil terror organization, and we really feel the love and we appreciate it very much.
And we do feel, at whichever level you look at it, wars never help anybody. We just hope better sense prevails and we have peace. Thank you very much, Mr. Levy, for joining me on the News Hour tonight.